Hello again, it's Dr. Ryan here with Straight Up Spine and Posture. We're going to be talking about some common questions that I get regarding back pain. And one of the more common ones that I get regarding back pain is sitting. How does sitting cause back pain? What is its role in back pain? How much sitting is too much? Blah, blah, blah. And it's an important question. I see a lot of different hypotheses on sitting, and a lot of them are basically mumbo jumbo. So this is the real reason that sitting causes issues with the body in general, the hips, and ultimately leads to back pain. Basically, the mechanism of injury from sitting is that it affects your gluteal muscles. The gluteal muscles are the butt cheek, and in particular, you have many butt cheek muscles, kind of like a shoulder. There's the big ones, and there's the rotator cuff. Same thing in the hips. You got a ball and socket joint. It has muscles that are very similar to your shoulder muscles. That would be the butt cheek, the glute max. And then it's got little guys under there, the piriformis and the glomellas and the obturators and all these little small guys, kind of like the rotator cuff. Same deal. And so the issue with sitting is that it weakens the strongest muscle in that group, which is the glute max. It's literally the strongest muscle in your body. So if you have a muscle that's stronger than glute max, you've got a problem. It should not be that way. That would make you literally out of balance. And what we'll commonly see is that there's two muscles that are right next to the glute max, which can sometimes become dominant. And so you may have experienced this if you have back pain. Option number one, besides the glute, which is where we want that strength, option number one is that people become dominant with their backs. Not rocket science there, how that's going to literally crush your own back by its own strength. A back is not a hip muscle and doesn't do a good job being one. Option number two, if perhaps you have tight hamstrings, they're directly below. So they will try to do the job of the glute a lot of times, and the issues with that is that the hamstring and the back have to work together to make the glute, to mimic glute activity. So one of the great ways to tone down your back and your hamstrings is to focus on your glutes. So the mechanism of injury, how sitting causes damage to this muscle, is its chronic stretching. So it's not that there's a muscle in the front, your hip flexors, that are shortened. A lot of people obsess over that. It's not very effective to do that. I can tell you clinically, you don't get really good results from having patients stretch their hip flexors. We tried for a long time, and unfortunately what they teach us in school and common knowledge, what you're going to see on YouTube, is it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Where working on the glutes does. So it's not the short muscle in the front. It's not stretching that's helpful. It's the muscle that's chronically lengthened. And you can think about that in terms of strength. If I have a bicep and I'm trying to curl a load like a dumbbell, that muscle needs to contract completely to produce that strength. And if it gets lengthened, it would not be able to shorten completely, and I couldn't complete the movement. And so that's exactly what happens in the hip here. As I sit for 8 hours a day or whatever, this muscle is physically stretched out and it's physically lengthened to the point where it cannot fully contract without some training. And that's what we do here, obviously. We train glutes to produce shortening so people's backs stop hurting. That works. Stretching the front does not. So if you've been trying that for a while, stop and try this instead. It'll work for you. And so let's demonstrate what happens with this. This is a common postural issue, thus why it's in our name. If this muscle here, the glute, when it contracts completely, it should squeeze and push my hips forward under my body so that I'm standing upright. Now obviously I'm kind of excessively squeezing them to produce some arching globally of my torso, but in fact I can almost round my back and still produce that look. So if this can't completely contract, what you get is this slight forward stoop. And the body will not tolerate this because it will not look at the ground. It has to look ahead, and the brain will override the body in almost all cases. So what it does is just, it'll wrench your back into a deep arch, and that's painful and causes spasm and other issues and things like that. So this is a common, compensation pattern that we can see easily, both in just people's posture, the way that they stand, but also the way that they move. So those types of people will use their back first rather than using their glutes because they've been damaged. So let's talk about how do we fix it. The easiest way to fix it is simply by strengthening the glutes. Not exactly rocket science there either. But the way that we want to do that has to exclude the back and ideally the hamstrings as well from participating. If we want to focus on the glute, We don't want to include other muscles that like to mimic what the glute does. And so, for example, a glute bridge, where you lay on the ground and lift your butt off the ground, that's literally impossible to do unless you're using your back. So it is not, by definition, a good exercise, just strictly based on how it's performed. I don't care if your glutes get sore or whatever, it's not ideal. There's better ways to do it. So some of the kind of standard exercises that you see touted as effective are outdated. Even though, yeah, it activates your glute, it's a bad exercise for back pain patients because it's also getting their back. And there are going to be people out there like, oh, I had results from that. That's cool, good for them. But for the majority of patients, if you do a better version of it, you're going to get better results. So we're going to talk about that. So just real quick, let's go through and talk about, if I ask people, you know, what exercises work the glutes, I always get two answers. So one is people like the deep squat. So as I squat down deeply, my glutes are under a lot of stretch. And this is hard. So when a muscle's lengthened, it's hard to contract that muscle. So this feels hard and it will produce soreness of the glutes. But as I stand up and up and up and up, now what's happening is there's basically no load on the glutes at all. So it just gets under myself and boom. At the top of the movement, right, there's very little glute activity going on here. Most of the glute activity is occurring at the very bottom of this movement when it's stretched out. So not a very good option for shortening a glute because it only works the glute heavily when the glute is lengthened. When the glute is shortened in this position, it's not doing anything. You're getting virtually no load on this. Now the other one that it'll get is some deadlift variant. And same story there. It gets a lot of hammy load and stuff like that. But as I come up right into the lockout phase, you know, my glutes aren't really doing too much. So that's also an incorrect answer in terms of a glute exercise. Like, yes, it'll make your glutes sore, of course. That's not the point. It's not a glute dominant exercise. So really, in my opinion, the only way to get a glute dominant exercise is, this is one of Brett Contreras' brainchilds. This is called the American hip thrust. And the man invented this, I think, chiefly for aesthetic reasons, which it is highly effective at. What he stumbled upon, though, in my opinion, is kind of one of the fundamental answers to back pain. And so his hip thrust is called an American hip thrust. And let's talk about the hip thrust. So traditionally you would do hip thrust with some weight, like a lot of weight, like 1.5 body weights is usually what we're looking for from our clients. So a couple 100 pounds in most cases. Now, I would put the weight, you know, on my hips here, but it's hard to see on the video. So just this would be on my hips, and then basically I get on a bench, and then I'll hip thrust so that I come to a lockout phase. Now, let's take this apart. At the bottom, my hips are stretched out. And then as I perform the exercise, my hips go up and up and up, and my glutes get shorter and shorter and shorter. And at the top of the phase, at the lockout phase, this is the highest load on the glutes. So this is where they're the most shortened. And that's why this is a very effective exercise, is because it shortens the glute when it's at the highest load. So it accomplishes what we're trying to get if we're trying to shorten the glutes. This is going to be how you do it. It's got to be an exercise that leads to shortening of the glute at the highest load, okay? So that's why the hip thrust, in particular, the American hip thrust variant, is very effective at that, all right? So that's basically the skinny on what sitting does and how to fix it. So it's kind of lengthy, but if you're interested in a technical definition, I hope this gives you everything that you needed. If you have more questions, feel free to comment below and I'll write you back a very long answer if you've got a long question.